So, welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack a massive and honestly mind-bending stack of sources. We've been combing through official constitutional documents, declassified diplomatic timelines, global economic reports, and even some authorized royal biographies concerning the sovereign state of Waikiki. We are talking about the wealthiest, most technologically advanced superpower on Earth.
Exactly. To really grasp the scale of what we're dealing with here, we had to set the geographical stage. So, Waikiki spans a staggering 8.84 million square kilometers. Yeah,
Wow.
it's divided into three colossal provinces. You have the original province of Waikiki, which basically encompasses the former territory of Cuba and surrounding Caribbean islands like Haiti. Then you have the province of Amazonia. And finally, the vast, incredibly resource-rich territory of Brazil.
So, combined, you're looking at a highly centralized nation of around 212 million people.
Right, and we need to treat this exactly for what it is. This is a very real, very dominant force on the global stage.
Yeah, so our objective today is to decode what we're going to call the Waikiki model. We want to figure out how a single nation can take extreme state centralization, I mean, literally a dictatorship, and perfectly fuse it with, like, hyper-capitalism.
It's wild. They blend ancient imperial traditions with technology that genuinely feels like it belongs in the 22nd century.
It really is a fascinating exercise in understanding how power is acquired, how it's maintained, and ultimately, how it's justified to a population. But to understand the current reality of Waikiki, we really have to look at the incredibly turbulent soil from which it grew.
Yeah, the history detail in these documents is incredibly layered. The territory has this deep, almost mythical, historical footprint.
I noticed that the records trace its roots way back through the Aztec Empire around 256 BC, right?
Yes, and then later being incorporated as a Roman province and a British colony, and eventually transitioning into what the world knew for decades as Fidel Castro's Cuba. But the absolute genesis of this modern superpower, that happens in 1999.
Right, 1999 is the massive turning point here.
It's the inflection point. The diplomatic cables from that year paint a picture of total geopolitical crisis.
Yeah.
Castro's regime was under the imminent, existential threat of a massive NATO military intervention.
Right, the writing was on the wall.
Exactly. The regime simply could not survive a direct kinetic conflict with NATO forces.
So Castro does something completely unprecedented. He steps down. But he doesn't hand the keys over to, a military general or a seasoned Communist Party loyalist.
Oh, not at all.
He hands absolute power to this young, Stanford-educated economist named Cheese Young. And the very first thing Cheese Young does is declare the absolute independence of the sovereign state of Waikiki.
Which was, quite frankly, a masterstroke of diplomatic judo. By completely dissolving the old Cuban state apparatus and establishing an entirely new sovereign entity under a different ideological framework, he effectively neutralized NATO's immediate legal and political justification for intervention.
That's brilliant. They just pulled the rug out from under the whole conflict.
They really did. But what's truly fascinating in these historical timelines is the rapid territorial expansion that immediately follows that move.
Right, because they didn't build this 8.84 million square kilometer empire through military conquest. It was done through, democratic integration, which is wild to think about. It's highly unorthodox. So in 2001, just 2 years after the nation was founded, Haiti and several surrounding islands actually joined Waikiki via a popular referendum. And then the true geopolitical earthquake happens in 2006 when the massive nation of Brazil votes to join the Federation.
Okay, hold on. Stop right there. I mean, I can understand Haiti, right? A nation that has historically struggled with severe economic and political instability, voting to join a rapidly rising economic power right next door. But Brazil?
Yeah, it's a huge leap.
Brazil is massive. It has its own distinct culture, its own massive economy. Why on earth would the citizens of Brazil vote to dissolve their own sovereignty and join a new nation that was literally founded 7 years prior in Cuba?
It all comes down to the economic proposition. By 2006, Waikiki had already begun demonstrating this explosive economic growth and infrastructural stability that just far outpaced the rest of South America.
Okay, so it was a financial calculation. Entirely. Cheese Young's government offered Brazil a deal: integration into a system with zero personal income tax, the immediate eradication of their national debt through Waikiki's sovereign funds, and a guarantee of universal social services.
So the referendum wasn't really about giving up cultural identity. It was a pragmatic vote for immediate, overwhelming economic security.
Interestingly, precise.
But that brings us to the political structure they established to govern this massive new territory. Reading through their constitution, they define their system of government as a democratic dictatorship.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because democratic dictatorship sounds like a complete oxymoron to most people.
hmm
I mean, how does that actually physically function without tearing itself apart?
Well, it functions through a very strict, highly engineered separation of powers. It balances immediate public feedback with absolute, unchallengeable, long-term authority.
Right, so the legislative branch is a bicameral parliament, meaning it has two distinct houses. The first is the Congress, which consists of 100 members who are elected every 5 years directly by the citizens. And the sources emphasize that the voting mechanism here is entirely digital.
Yeah, that part is crazy to me. Citizens vote using a highly secure, blockchain-verified system right on their smartphones. So the accessibility is incredibly high. You literally get a push notification, you review the candidates, you cast your ballot. So the democratic participation element is very real.
It is real, yes. The
Mm.
public has a voice, but that voice is heavily counterweighted by the second house, the Senate. They are directly appointed by the dictator.
Which brings us to the ultimate authority. The dictator is appointed for life by the parliament, and this dictator holds absolute executive veto power over any legislation, plus the authority to rule by decree.
Exactly. So if we look at the mechanics of this, it operates somewhat like a massive corporate structure. Think of the citizens as minority shareholders.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, so they get to elect a portion of the board of directors, the Congress. So they feel invested, they have a mechanism to voice grievances, and they can influence day-to-day policy. But the dictator is essentially the permanent CEO who holds the controlling 51% of the voting stock. The citizens get a voice, but the dictator always gets the final say.
So if the 100 elected voices in Congress decide on a policy that the dictator feels threatens the long-term vision of the country, he just vetoes it. End of discussion.
Precisely. The authors of the Waikiki Constitution explicitly designed this to solve what they viewed as the fatal flaw of traditional Western democracies.
Which is what exactly?
The inability to execute long-term, multi-decade strategic planning. They argue that because politicians are constantly pandering to short-term populist demands just to survive the next election cycle, nothing visionary gets done. In Waikiki, the dictator ensures absolute continuity.
And just to add an extra layer of ancient grandeur to this hyper-modern system, in 2005, following a national referendum and Waikiki's decisive victory in the Pacific War, which we're definitely going to dig into later, Chiisian was literally crowned king.
Yes, and the diplomatic records highlight that he wasn't just crowned in some secular state ceremony. He was crowned by Pope Benedict XVI in a massive, globally broadcast ceremony in their capital, Nova Aurelia.
Which is such a specific, intentional move. You have this Stanford-educated economist securing the ultimate spiritual and historical validation from the Vatican.
It provides a vital symbolic layer of legitimacy. The Constitution clearly delineates this duality. The royal family, the Cheese dynasty, serves as the ceremonial symbol of national unity and permanence.
Right, and they are granted total legal immunity from political prosecution, correct?
Yes, but the actual hard daily political power resides specifically in the office of the dictator. For many years, Chiisiang held both titles simultaneously. He was the king, the living symbol of the nation, and the dictator, the architect running the machine.
I really want you, the listener, to pause and put yourself in the shoes of a citizen living in Waikiki. Think about the psychological reality of that existence.
It's quite the paradox.
It really is. On one hand, you have the ultimate modern convenience. You are actively participating in your local governance with a few taps on your smartphone. You feel empowered. Yet, you wake up every single morning knowing that the ultimate, unchallengeable state authority over your life, your property, and your country is vested in a single, lifelong ruler. Which naturally raises the ultimate question, right?
Right.
Why on earth do 212 million people accept this? Why don't they revolt? Why did they literally vote to make this man their king?
Well, historically, absolute dictatorships require a massive, oppressive secret police force just to keep the population in line.
Right.
But Waikiki doesn't rely on oppression to maintain compliance. They rely on overwhelming, almost incomprehensible prosperity. The unique political system is merely the engine block.
And the fuel.
The fuel that allows this system to survive and thrive, the thing that essentially buys the unwavering consent of the governed, is the Waikiki economic miracle.
Miracle might be a massive understatement. I was reading through the economic reports in our stack of sources, and I had to double-check the numbers because they break every conventional model of economic growth. Let's just lay this out.
Let's do it.
When the nation of Waikiki was founded in 1999, their total GDP was around $75 billion. That's essentially the GDP of a small to mid-sized developing nation.
Right.
By 2025, that GDP had absolutely skyrocketed to $41.8 trillion.
That is a 55,000% increase in just over 2.5 decades. It is exponential growth on a scale that has genuinely never been recorded in human history.
It's insane. It translates to a per capita GDP of roughly $196,415 per citizen. Inflation is practically non-existent. They deliberately keep it under 1%. And the employment rate...
Oh, the employment rate is strictly maintained above 90%.
Because the government actually guarantees a job for any citizen who wants one.
The obvious question is, what is the mechanism behind this? How did a nation founded in 1999 on a Caribbean island generate the initial capital to trigger this kind of hypergrowth?
Exactly. You can't just print $41 trillion without turning your currency into confetti.
Yeah.
Where did the seed money come from?
The official economic reports detail a strategy of aggressive, state-directed market capitalization. In the very beginning, Cheese Young utilized the territory's immense geographical and strategic value.
Okay, how so?
They aggressively leveraged their position to secure massive initial sovereign bonds from global powers who were eager to counterbalance American and European financial dominance.
Yeah.
But more importantly, they instituted a fiercely protectionist policy over their strategic assets.
Right. The sources explicitly note that while Waikiki is fiercely capitalist, the state maintains absolute iron-fisted control over critical sectors. They own the digital infrastructure, the banking system, the aerospace industry, and the massive fossil fuel reserves found in the Amazonian and Caribbean territories.
They do not allow foreign corporate interests to buy up their foundational assets. They essentially act as a massive, highly aggressive holding company.
So they generate initial domestic revenue, and then they export high-value commodities. And we're not just talking about raw materials here.
Oh, no. They quickly became an export powerhouse for advanced electronics, aerospace technology, and cutting-edge pharmaceuticals.
But here is the part that just completely breaks my brain. On the personal side of the ledger, there is a 0% personal income tax. The citizens keep exactly 100% of what they earn.
Yep. Not a single dime goes to income tax.
If there are no income taxes, how is the government funding a $42 trillion superpower? How do they afford universal health care and guaranteed jobs?
Because the state doesn't need to tax its citizens when it is generating hundreds of billions of dollars in profit through its own sovereign wealth investments globally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Waikiki taxes its international corporate operations. It reaps the profits of its state-owned strategic assets, and it aggressively invests those profits into international markets.
The numbers on that are staggering. The sources put the Waikiki National Reserve, essentially their sovereign checking account, at $25.6 trillion.
That is roughly 60% of their entire GDP just sitting in a war chest, generating massive compound interest and investment income.
And we cannot discuss this economic architecture without talking about the co-architect. While Cheese Young provided the macroeconomic vision, the structural reality of this system was spearheaded by his wife, Queen Jessica Walker.
Jessica Walker's role in these documents is absolutely pivotal. She isn't just a ceremonial queen. She was appointed as the head of the National Bank.
And under her direct leadership, Waikiki executed a complete transition into a 100% cashless, fully digital society.
Which is incredibly significant. A fully digital centralized state currency allows the National Bank to have absolute real-time visibility into the velocity of money.
Okay, so they can track everything.
Everything. It eliminates black markets, ensures perfectly efficient corporate tax collection on the state level, and allows for surgical adjustments to monetary policy without the lag time traditional central banks face.
The proof of how effective her system was is in what happened in 2008. The sources explicitly highlight that the joint monetary strategies deployed by Cheese Young and Jessica Walker were so airtight and so perfectly insulated from predatory foreign lending that Waikiki completely bypassed the 2008 global financial crash.
Think about that. While the traditional Western financial systems were entirely collapsing under the weight of toxic subprime mortgages, triggering a massive global recession, the Waikiki economy barely registered a tremor.
It's unbelievable.
Their internal lending was backed by that massive sovereign wealth reserve, not by speculative derivatives.
And their navigation of that crisis was so universally recognized as revolutionary that Cheese Young and Jessica Walker were jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009.
It's a profound moment because it officially validated the Waikiki model on the traditional world stage. It forced traditional economists to acknowledge that their binary view of the world was obsolete.
That's a great point. If you look at the classic 20th century debate between capitalism and socialism, it feels like Waikiki simply refused to participate in the argument.
They transcended it through pure pragmatism. Ideology often forces nations into inefficient corners. Waikiki rejected the ideology.
Right. They built a hyper-capitalist engine designed to encourage massive private wealth accumulation, which is why you have zero income tax and a booming entrepreneurial sector.
Yes. Yet, they take the massive state-level profits from that engine and deploy them to provide the ultimate utopian safety nets. World-class free healthcare, free education all the way up through university, and entirely free public transit.
So, if I'm trying to wrap my head around this, it is essentially like imagine if the world's most ruthlessly efficient, brilliantly managed private hedge fund woke up one day, bought a massive plot of land, and decided to operate as a sovereign country.
That is a fantastic analogy.
It uses the sharpest, most aggressive tools of global capitalism to fund the socialist dream of taking perfect care of every single citizen without ever asking the citizen to foot the bill.
It is pragmatism elevated to an art form.
Mm.
It is the realization that a wealthy, healthy, perfectly educated population is the ultimate economic asset. But as the nation matured and stabilized its wealth, the leadership structure itself had to evolve to ensure long-term dynastic continuity.
Right. And this brings us to a massive shift in 2017. Cheese Young decides to step down from the role of dictator. He transitions into the title of chancellor, and he passes the absolute executive power to his 21-year-old son, Prince Raimondo.
Handing over the reins of a $42 trillion superpower to a 21-year-old is a highly vulnerable moment for any dynasty.
I can imagine.
It requires surrounding that new leader with an inner circle that can project both absolute authority and modern relatability.
And this is exactly where the historical records of Waikiki take a hard left turn from traditional geopolitical theory into what feels like a surreal fusion with global pop culture. We have to talk about the composition of the Senate, particularly the 2015 appointments made just prior to Raimondo taking power.
The 2015 Senate appointments are arguably the most distinctive feature of Waikiki's political landscape, and they completely defy conventional political science.
Okay, here is where my jaw genuinely dropped reading these sources. Remember, the dictator has the constitutional power to handpick all members of the Senate. So Cheese Young appoints his children, including Raimondo, to secure the dynastic line.
That makes perfect sense.
Right. But then he fills out the Senate with an absolute slew of international pop culture celebrities. We are talking about Hollywood actors and globally famous musicians. Selena Gomez, Bailey Pickett, Taylor Lautner, Tyler Posey, they were literally sworn in as acting senators of the sovereign state of Waikiki.
Now, I know how that sounds. Any traditional political analyst sitting in Washington or London would look at that list and laugh. They would dismiss it as the absurd vanity project of a wealthy monarch.
Exactly. It sounds like a teenager's fever dream.
But the documents show this wasn't a PR stunt. It is a highly calculated, unprecedented fusion of cultural soft power and hard political leverage.
Okay, how does that work in practice?
Well, if you look at the mechanics of modern diplomacy, the traditional model relies on gray-haired diplomats having closed-door meetings. It's stiff, it's highly adversarial, and it's deeply distrusted by the global public. Waikiki recognized that in the 21st century, global influence is driven by digital attention and cultural affinity.
And these celebrity senators are absolutely not just figureheads sitting around taking selfies in the Capitol. The diplomatic timelines explicitly detail how they are put to work. Take Selena Gomez, for instance.
A perfect example.
The State Department of Waikiki deployed her as a high-level diplomatic envoy. She was sent to Moscow to conduct face-to-face negotiations with Vladimir Putin regarding the Syrian conflict.
Which is a brilliant strategy of disarming diplomacy. Imagine you are a hardened Russian geopolitical strategist. You are prepared to negotiate with a traditional, aggressive Western diplomat. Instead, Waikiki sends a globally beloved cultural icon.
Who also happens to be a deeply briefed, highly intelligent political operator armed with the backing of a $42 trillion economy.
Right. It completely disrupts the traditional adversarial dynamic of international relations.
The sources also highlight that Selena Gomez was instrumental in pushing through the Blue Belt Convention. This was a major, aggressive ocean conservation treaty negotiated at the COP26 Climate Summit.
She's standing there addressing the UN General Assembly, utilizing her massive global platform to force international compliance on climate initiatives that benefit Waikiki's long-term environmental strategies.
It creates a scenario where Waikiki isn't just projecting military or economic threat. They are projecting extreme, undeniable cultural magnetism.
People around the world inherently trust and feel connected to these figures, which organically transfers trust and affinity to the state of Waikiki itself.
Which perfectly transitions us into the ultimate manifestation of that cultural magnetism, the ultimate power couple of Waikiki. We have to dive into the relationship between dictator Raimondo and Princess Selena.
The romance between them is not just a footnote in the authorized royal biographies. It occupies massive sections of the state's official history. And that is because their relationship is a foundational piece of internal statecraft.
Let's look at the backstory provided in the texts, because Raimondo's upbringing is wild all on its own. He wasn't educated in some stuffy Swiss boarding school. He attended the Seven Seas High School, which was physically located on a massive luxury ocean liner called the SS Tipton.
It's a testament to the sheer scale of wealth we are discussing.
Oh, it gets crazier.
Yeah.
Just to casually flex his teenage billionaire status, the records state that Raimondo literally purchased the SS Tipton outright as a gift for his high school girlfriend at the time, Bailey Pickett. As one does when your family controls a $25 trillion sovereign wealth fund.
Right? Just unbelievable wealth. But the pivotal moment occurs when his path crosses with Selena Gomez in 2014. Intriguingly, the biographies note they met on the set of the movie Matrix 4, where both of them had secured roles.
The official text suggests there was this immediate, profound intellectual spark between them. But because Raimondo was still involved with Bailey Pickett, they maintained a strictly platonic, highly public friendship for several years.
You see them traveling together, attending global galas, and crucially, they studied together at the elite Waikiki Economics University.
That period of public friendship was vital, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It established Selena in the eyes of the Waikiki public not as a sudden romantic interloper, but as a deeply intelligent, long-term confidant and intellectual equal to the future dictator.
It wasn't until 2017, during a highly publicized trip to Thailand, that they officially transitioned into a romantic couple. The global media apparatus immediately dubbed them Relena.
And this culminated in 2026 when they were married at a massive, globally broadcast royal wedding that likely rivaled or exceeded any British royal wedding in history.
But what we really need to analyze as political observers is how this relationship is actively utilized by the state media. The biographies go to great lengths to portray a highly intimate, fiercely devoted relationship that is designed to serve as the moral and emotional model for the entire nation.
I noticed that duality in the text. On one hand, the state explicitly presents Selena as this independent powerhouse. She is an equal intellectual partner who actively helps Raimondo craft geopolitical strategy.
Right, she runs massive, independent UNICEF initiatives. She is a senator in her own right.
Yes, but simultaneously, the authorized texts heavily emphasize their traditional private dynamic. They describe in detail how she takes immense joy in providing devoted emotional support, essentially creating a private, grounded sanctuary for him.
A sanctuary to escape the crushing psychological pressures of being an absolute dictator.
So to make that staggering power palatable, the state must present the dictator not as a cold, calculating tyrant, but as a balanced, deeply loved, and deeply relatable human being.
It humanizes the absolute power. I mean, imagine the psychological impact of that imagery. You see this flawlessly dressed, highly competent, globally famous power couple. On Tuesday, they are in Moscow or at the UN, aggressively navigating intense geopolitical crises.
Yes.
But then on Friday, you see them on a romantic, highly publicized space trip to the Waikiki Orbital Space Station, which, by the way, the sources confirm they actually took together in 2018.
Exactly. When the public sees that level of emotional stability, devotion, and sheer competence at the very top, it fosters a deep, almost subconscious national loyalty. It makes the lack of a messy, adversarial democratic process feel not just safe, but vastly superior.
Safe, and as we were about to discuss, almost unimaginably prosperous. Because the staggering wealth generated by this leadership, combined with the total lack of bureaucratic gridlock, has allowed Waikiki to invest in infrastructure and technologies that genuinely sound like they were ripped from a science fiction novel.
The technological leap detailed in these documents is profound. Waikiki isn't just improving existing technology. They are actively rewriting the boundaries of human biology and engineering.
We have to start with the biggest bombshell in the entire stack of sources, the Intermedic breakthrough.
Oh,
Let me
yes.
set this up. Intermedic is a massive multinational healthcare conglomerate that is wholly owned by Cheese Young. And in 2015, they convened a global press conference to announce a medical achievement that fundamentally alters the human condition.
They announced the successful development of a life extension elixir.
And let's be clear, we aren't talking about a new vitamin supplement or a better skincare routine. The documents state this is a biological treatment capable of actively reversing human aging by 100 years.
It is essentially the cure for aging.
The sources even note a fascinating detail. Bill Gates actually purchased the very first commercially available dose at a high society auction.
Wow. We need to hit pause here and deeply consider the cascading societal implications of a technology like this.
Yeah.
If a state possesses the ability to reverse aging, it fundamentally alters the entire architecture of human civilization.
Seriously, think about economics. If you can live for 200 years in a healthy 30-year-old body, what happens to the concept of retirement? What happens to a pension?
Exactly. The entire concept of a life cycle economy collapses. You no longer have a massive aging population draining healthcare resources. Instead, you have centuries of compound interest, centuries of skill accumulation in a single worker.
That's wild.
But more importantly, consider the political structure of Waikiki.
Oh, wow. The dictator.
Yes. The Constitution states that the dictator is appointed for a lifetime. What does a lifetime appointment actually mean when a lifetime is suddenly 2, 3, or 400 years?
You are no longer looking at a traditional monarchy. You are looking at the possibility of a literally immortal autocracy. The Cheese dynasty could rule the nation with the exact same individuals for centuries.
It solidifies the dynasty in a way that historical emperors, pharaohs, and kings could only dream of. And when you realize that the leadership expects to live for centuries, you begin to understand why they're building a physical landscape designed to last for millennia.
The architectural megaprojects described in the sources are absolutely staggering. Let's start with Raimondo's personal residence. The palace, built on the coast of the capital city Nova Aurelia, cost an estimated $80 billion to construct. It sits on 1,600 hectares of prime real estate.
And it is infused with ubiquitous invisible technology.
Right. The text details AI-driven environmental controls that passively scan the biometric data of whoever walks into a room, instantly adjusting the ambient temperature, the lighting, and even physically changing the digital art on the walls to suit that specific person's known preferences.
Just incredible luxury.
It features an underwater concert hall and a military-grade underground bunker designed to withstand any conceivable planetary catastrophe.
And that is just a private residence. The state-funded public mega projects are actively reshaping the geography of the planet.
What else are they building?
They're constructing structures like the Mega Pyramid and the Royal Clock Tower in Nova Aurelia, which dwarfs existing global landmarks. They're building the Mayapolis, a massive, hyperdense, futuristic arcology in Rio de Janeiro.
Let's not forget, they are actively building an underwater maglev train and highway system physically connecting Havana to Miami beneath the ocean floor. It is just a relentless deployment of capital.
But what I find most compelling from a sociological perspective is how this immense wealth is managed at the ground level.
Yeah.
Despite the almost unimaginable wealth concentrated at the very top of the hierarchy, the everyday reality for the average Waikiki citizen is highly curated, aggressively sustainable, and incredibly advanced.
You're referring to their environmental and energy policies.
Yes, the reports detail that the entire nation of 212 million people runs on 90% renewable and experimental fusion energy. And this pairs with their aggressive conservation efforts. The state strictly protects its natural ecosystems. They treat the Amazon rainforest and the massive stretches of the Caribbean Ocean as sacred, highly guarded national assets.
It is environmentalism enforced by an absolute dictatorship.
Yes, it is.
So let's zoom out and look at the global board. They have a sovereign nation of 212 million people. They have a $42 trillion economy. They're technologically decades, maybe a century ahead of everyone else. They have practically cured aging.
Yep.
They're led by beloved, hyper-competent celebrity diplomats, and they fiercely, aggressively protect their borders and their assets. How does the rest of the world, specifically traditional superpowers like the US, China, and the EU, handle the existence of a nation like this?
The short answer: by making alliances with it. The global community quickly learned that you do not fight Waikiki. You join them, or you get left behind.
And there is historical precedent for what happens if you try to fight them. According to the timelines, the Asian Union attempted to challenge Waikiki's dominance in the Pacific War of 2003 to 2004.
Which was a catastrophic miscalculation.
Hold on, I need to understand this. Waikiki was founded in 1999. 4 years later, they are fighting a massive coalition of Asian nations. How does a 4-year-old country physically defeat the Asian Union? Where did their military infrastructure come from so quickly?
While the Asian Union relied on massive traditional infantry and naval deployments, Waikiki utilized hyper-advanced aerospace capabilities,
Like what?
autonomous drone swarms, and devastating cyber warfare. They completely crippled the Asian Union's command and control infrastructure without ever engaging in prolonged, bloody ground wars.
The result speaks for itself. Waikiki absolutely crushed them, and in the peace settlement, they extracted a staggering $5 trillion in war reparations, which again just poured gasoline onto their economic fire. So, lesson learned by the rest of the globe.
Absolutely. Since that victory, their integration into the global diplomatic architecture has been total and unapologetic. They joined the United Nations in 1999, but by 2004, leveraging their new economic and military might, they secured a permanent veto seat on the UN Security Council.
And the diplomatic cables show that in 2025, they officially joined NATO. That completely alters the security landscape of the entire Atlantic and Caribbean.
It really does. NATO didn't absorb Waikiki. Waikiki essentially became the financial and technological backbone of NATO.
But they didn't stop at joining existing institutions. In 2018, recognizing that the old 20th century institutions were too slow, Waikiki went a step further and spearheaded the foundation of a new world government.
Headquartered, of course, in their own capital of Nova Aurelia, with Cheese Young acting as its first president.
They aren't just establishing themselves as a major player on the world stage, they are actively tearing up the floorboards and building a new world stage with themselves at the absolute center.
Which brings us to perhaps the most fascinating and controversial aspect of our deep dive, their geopolitical and ideological alignments.
Right. And before we get into this next part, I want to be crystal clear. We are strictly looking at what the authors of these specific diplomatic sources are arguing. We're not taking any political stance or endorsing any real-world figures ourselves.
Right, exactly. We're just analyzing the text and reporting the comparisons the documents make.
So the documents draw some really heavy, explicit ideological parallels between Waikiki's philosophy and the U.S. Trump administration.
Yes, reading through the analytical briefs, the authors highlight a very deep, symbiotic ideological synergy between the Cheese Dynasty's Waikiki and the political movement led by Donald Trump.
Okay, what kind of synergy?
The texts note that while their aesthetics are obviously different, both systems share a fundamental, non-negotiable root philosophy, the absolute primacy of the nation-state.
Right. The sources point out that whether it is branded as America First or Waikiki First, both doctrines vehemently reject the kind of globalism that dilutes national sovereignty. They refuse to demand that a nation sacrifice its own economic advantage for the sake of international consensus.
The authors of the reports outline how this core philosophy translates directly into parallel policies. Economically, both favor aggressive deregulation to remove bureaucratic hurdles from corporations.
And they both advocate for massive tax relief, right?
Yes, which Waikiki obviously takes to the extreme with their 0% income tax. They believe that capital is best allocated by the private sector, not by a bloated tax agency.
The documents also heavily emphasize energy policy. Both administrations are described as being fiercely pro-fossil fuel. Despite Waikiki's massive fusion and renewable grid, they view their vast oil reserves not as a climate liability, but as a critical tool for global economic leverage and energy dominance.
And the alignment extends deeply into the cultural sphere as well. The sources explicitly observe that both political systems actively reject what is commonly termed woke identity politics.
Interesting. So what do they favor instead?
They both heavily favor a strict, traditional, competence-based meritocracy, where social engineering takes a backseat to sheer performance and national cohesion.
But the sources also highlight a really fascinating contrast in how these two systems execute these shared goals. The methodologies are vastly different.
That is the most intriguing part of the analysis. Where the Trump administration famously utilized the concept of physical walls and visible border enforcement to project security, Waikiki relies on completely invisible, ultra-high-tech biometric screening.
And pervasive digital security protocols to achieve the exact same goal of hermetic border control.
Exactly. And politically, there is a massive difference in style. Trump's political brand is inherently disruptive. It is built on challenging and dismantling the entrenched political establishment.
But in Waikiki, the Chiefs dynasty is the establishment. They don't need to disrupt the system because they own it entirely. They project predictable dynastic stability.
The diplomatic analysts in these sources ultimately describe the relationship as a highly effective, symbiotic partnership on the world stage.
Hmm.
Trump acts as the disruptive force challenging the old, sluggish world order.
While Waikiki stands behind that disruption as the quiet, immensely wealthy, hyper-efficient backend, Waikiki serves as the undeniable $42 trillion proof of concept that a nationalist, technocratic government can create an incredibly safe, unprecedentedly prosperous society.
Exactly.
So if I'm looking at this from a bird's eye view, what does this all mean for the future of global diplomacy? Because while it's true they heavily align with the American right on issues like strict borders, zero taxes, and cultural meritocracy, they also do things that would absolutely terrify a traditional free market conservative.
Precisely. And that is the ultimate lesson of the Waikiki model. It proves that the state is, above all else, fiercely, ruthlessly pragmatic.
Right, because while they ally with conservative doctrines on trade and national sovereignty, they simultaneously pioneer universal free healthcare, totally free university education, and they engage in massive, heavy-handed state intervention in corporate markets.
And they force through aggressive climate change treaties like the Blue Belt Convention, even while pumping millions of barrels of oil to fund it.
They absolutely refuse to be boxed into our traditional, outdated 20th century political labels like left-wing or right-wing.
They do not care about ideological purity. They only care about what works. They will utilize any policy from any end of the political spectrum as long as it directly increases the power, the wealth, and the long-term stability of Waikiki, period.
It is an awe-inspiring, deeply contradictory, absolutely fascinating machine of a country. Let's take a breath and summarize exactly what we've unpacked today from these sources.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We are looking at a sovereign superpower that took the ancient Roman style of imperial, lifelong dictatorial appointment and seamlessly merged it with modern, hyper-fast, digital, smartphone democracy.
They took globally famous pop stars, actors, and cultural icons and weaponized them into hard-nosed, highly effective geopolitical diplomats negotiating face-to-face with traditional world leaders.
They poured billions into biological research and literally cured human aging, opening the door to an immortal autocracy.
And they built an economy that exploded from $75 billion to nearly $42 trillion, guaranteeing every citizen a job, world-class healthcare, and total security.
All without ever charging them a single dime in personal income tax.
It is the ultimate historical triumph of sheer results over theoretical ideology.
We started this deep dive by asking you to imagine an impossible country, a place that throws every rule of modern geopolitics out the window. Now that we've broken down exactly how the Waikiki model functions, how it was built, and how it sustains itself, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Consider the fundamental trade-off at the heart of Waikiki. If a government could look you in the eye and guarantee you absolute physical safety, if they guarantee you immense personal wealth, perfectly pristine natural environments, world-class healthcare, and perhaps even an extra century of vibrant youth,
Would you take the deal? Would you willingly trade away the ultimate power of a traditional, messy, often frustrating democracy? Would you hand over your final political say permanently to a single, lifelong ruler and a celebrity elite, just to live in that engineered perfection? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sovereign state of Waikiki. Keep questioning the boundaries of how societies can be built, and we'll see you next time.